Chapter 1. The Drive. Trevor looked out from behind his desk as he wiped the table to the front of his shop down. The streets were eerily silent. Abandoned wrappers of forgotten goods drifted across the cobblestone roads by a faint breeze. Flags billowed in the night, and robots walked the streets looking for places to stay. Trevor fit in perfectly in this machine community because he was mostly machine himself. The only evidence he was in fact human were his face and compassionate heart for others. When he was satisfied with the cleanliness of the table, he reached out to close the shutters to the table he met customers behind. At that moment, a hand reached out weakly, and a raspy voice said, "Wait, please." Trevor stopped and slowly opened the shutters again. He peered around the corner, and there standing before him was a figure in a tattered gray cloak. Trevor stared at the figure for a while as if he were skeptical to respond to the stranger, but then the hood of the cloak was lifted, and Trevor was speechless for a couple of moments. "Devin?" he gasped. "Yes," rasped the figure in the cloak. "I am in need of your services once again, Trevor." Devin paused, then asked, "May I come in?" Of course, said Trevor. He hastily lifted the table out of the way and opened a hidden bottom section, which allowed Devin to step through. Once the cloaked figure was let inside of Trevor's shop, the shopkeeper carefully pulled the bottom section closed and placed the table back on top and closed the shutters above it. He clicked a light on the wall and a faint neon glow filled the room. This glow did not provide peace or comfort, nor did it provide warmth of any kind. It only chilled any who entered the shop, including Trevor himself. "Now," said Trevor as he sat behind a rickety metal desk, "what can I do for you?" "This," replied Devin. From within his cloak, he produced a hard drive. He handed it to Trevor and said, "Wipe it." "Wipe it?" asked Trevor. But at that moment, Devin began to dry heave, and Trevor stood up immediately to help his friend. "Stop, don't help me," coughed Devin. "Wipe the drive." Trevor nodded and, despite his better judgment, put on a pair of goggles with digital magnifiers on them, a pair of iron needles, and an infrared eyepiece, and once he was equipped, began to pry the hard drive with the two metal rods, as if he were expecting it to explode. "You needn't worry," rasped Devin. "The securities are disabled on it." Trevor frowned and said, "This is a Class 1 storage unit. There has to be some kind of security on it." "I assure you, the securities are disabled," replied Devin. Trevor nodded and sighed heavily. He carefully lowered the IR camera and activated his goggles and carefully lifted the lid of the hard drive. A small click echoed throughout the quiet shop, and the lid of the hard drive lifted. Within the small metal box was a glowing blue circuit board with various pulses of neon blue light zipping across its surface in an orderly fashion at tremendous speeds that were almost unfathomable to the human mind. Trevor had only seen this kind of drive once before, and he had hoped he would never see one again. He looked up from his work and asked, "Are you sure you want me to wipe it?" There was a pause from Devin, then a whisper. "They are coming." "What do you mean?" asked Trevor. "Where did you get this drive?" "Answer me, friend, where did you get this drive? Where did you get it?" Devin smiled a toothy smile and said, "The contents of that drive are top secret," he murmured. "But what is on it?" murmured Trevor. But his only response was Devin dry heaving as he clutched the metal desk for support. "A friend," coughed Devin, "told me to wipe it." "But why?" asked Trevor desperately. "What is on this drive, Devin?" Devin looked up and whispered, "They are close." "What?" began Trevor, but at that moment the sounds of metal hitting cobblestones could be heard outside. "Get going!" rasped Devin. "Wipe the drive, now!" Trevor nodded hastily, plugged the drive into a metal box with a slimy black cord, and pressed a button on a neon green, hovering holographic screen. A progress bar appeared, and it began to slowly make its way across the empty box to the other side of the holographic screen. "How long is this going to take?" moaned Devin. "Just a few minutes," said Trevor. "That isn't enough time," rasped Devin. He reached out a clammy hand and gripped Trevor's hand and said, "Promise me you will not let that drive out of your sight." "What?" began Trevor. "I want the data on this drive completely gone," rasped Devin, who began to cough violently shortly after. When he was finished, he turned to Trevor and said, "Do you give me your word?" "I," began Trevor. "Promise me that you will wipe this drive or die trying," rasped Devin. He turned to his right and whispered, "They're here." A second later, the sound of a pistol being fired echoed throughout the quiet room. Wood splintered, and seconds later, Devin crippled to the floor. Trevor looked up at the progress bar on the holographic screen. The wipe would not be completed in time. Just then, a figure entered the room with a pistol in its hand. Pulsating red lights could be seen on the weapon, creating an aura of ominous proportions. The figure pointed the weapon around the room, and more figures entered behind the first one. "Anyone there, Captain?" snarled one of the figures to the figure with the pistol. The captain looked around and spat on the ground where Devin lay. "There lies the data drive we need." The figure looked around at the empty shop and said, "Search him." The two cronies picked up Devin's limp body and searched him for the hard drive. After a few minutes, one of them spoke. "Captain, Devin does not have it." The captain looked off into the distance, past the body, beyond the metal desk, to an open door that was swaying in the wind. "Did you hear me, Captain? I said," began one of the cronies, but the captain raised the pistol and fired 3 quick shots, and the crony fell to the ground. The first crony watched as his buddy fell to the ground and said, "I will input tracking coordinates and scan the area with a deep space sensor sweep." The captain turned, and part of her face could be seen through her scarf covering her mouth and pirate's hat on her head. "Good." She pushed past the crony and said, "If anyone should try to stop you, kill them on sight. I will have that map if it is the last thing I do."